Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, I got a few nuggets on the quarterbacks playing this upcoming weekend and how I believe the Raiders should attack their offseason as it pertains to building the team and addressing the quarterback position. We'll close out the show with your calls and texts. It's all coming up on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, January 18th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. My man, Ari. Shout out to my man, Ari. I'll see him at the radio station. He's like, Q, how you feeling YouTube, man? What do you think about the YouTube? How's the page looking? Like, he is always stressing to make sure the YouTube page is looking good. And when he doesn't like something, he'll be like, Q, you got to do it a little bit better than this. You can't be doing it like that. Don't shortchange me. Give me more. I'm like, okay, Ari, I see you. So shout out to my man, Ari, doing a fantastic job making sure we're on point. Not only up on YouTube, but we're also on point. You can check out Ari on Twitter at Ari Produces. Today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast is brought to you by betonline.net. They got you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline.net, that is where the game starts. Got a lot to get to on today's show. I'm really psyched out about today's show, or pumped up about today's show, however you want to word it. I'm fired up, man, because I got this email from NFL Communications, and I get them 3-4 times a week, right? And sometimes the emails are really, really good, and they provide some really good nuggets, and then sometimes they're just okay, but they're always informative about something. Like during the regular season, it was a lot of, information like stats on Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs, Derek Carr, whatever, right? And so I was able to bring it to the show and just be able to provide a little bit more information, something to look forward to during the game. Well, obviously, the Raiders aren't playing anymore. So when I get these emails, I'm like, okay, what is this one talking about? And this one I thought was very interesting, and it doesn't directly affect the Raiders, but it kind of has to do with the Raiders. And this one's about the young quarterbacks playing this upcoming weekend. The email was actually called "The Future is Now," and at the same time, the future is very bright. Check this out. They said, look no further than this week's divisional playoffs, where 29-year-old Dak Prescott is the oldest starting quarterback remaining in contention for the Super Bowl. Think about that. He is the oldest dude that still has a chance to play in the Super Bowl, and he's 29 years old as a starting quarterback. That's it. How often do you see that? How often have you seen a bunch of young quarterbacks? I mean, we've been in the eras of the Bradys and the Rodgers and the Brees and, the cats like that were the Peyton Mannings, right? I mean, at least that was my era where all those quarterbacks were much older when they were still playing. And obviously Brady is still playing. So this email goes on to say, in fact, the average age of the 8 starting quarterbacks this week is 25 years and 278 days. That's the youngest group since the league began divisional playoffs with the 1970 merger. All 8 starting quarterbacks in the divisional round are under 30 years old, just the second time that's ever happened. It also occurred during the 2004 postseason. So clearly it doesn't happen very often. 2004 was many, many moons ago. So check this out. We go on further, right? In the AFC, this is obviously pertaining to the Raiders. All 4 starting quarterbacks, Josh Allen, 26 years, 246 days on game day. Joe Burrow, 26 years, 43 days. Trevor Lawrence, 23 years, 107 days. And Patrick Mahomes, 27 years, 126 days, are under 28. That's all in the AFC. The Raiders, not only do they have to go up against Patrick Mahomes twice a year, not only do they have to go up against Justin Herbert twice a year, but they get out of the AFC West, they get into the playoffs, they're going to have to face Josh Allen for years to come. They're going to have to face Joe Burrow for years to come. Lamar Jackson's not even mentioned in this because his team, the Ravens, they lost over the past weekend, and he's only 26 years old, right? Think about that. I mean, there's a lot of quality quarterbacks in the AFC. So not only do the Raiders have to battle the guys in their own division a couple times. And, oh, by the way, you got Russell Wilson as well. And I know he's not a spring chicken. He's not, 30 and under. He's definitely over the age, and he didn't have a good season this year. I think he's going to get right depending on who their head coach is going to be. That could be Sean Payton. That could be anyone else. Who knows? But they've got a gauntlet that they're going to have to go through. And once they get out of the AFC West, it's like, oh, yeah, here you go. You got Josh Allen and Joe Burrow to deal with. And Lamar Jackson, I do believe he'll be a Baltimore Raven moving forward. I don't think he's going to be on any other team. But, yeah, so in the AFC, all 4 starting quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and Patrick Mahomes, all under 28. In either conference, that's only happened twice previously in the AFC divisional rounds of 1984 with Mark Malone and Dave Craig and Pro Football Hall of Famers John Elway and Dan Marino, and then 2020 with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Baker Mayfield. And who knows where Baker Mayfield's going to play? I mean, he was at the Rams this past season, as we all very well know. Who knows where he ends up? He's still a young cat, too. So, guys that lost this past weekend, Justin Herbert, 24 years old. Jackson, as I mentioned, 26 years old. There's a lot of young cats, a lot of young, really good quarterbacks. And so what does that mean? Young quarterbacks are finding success earlier in the NFL than they ever used to. They're coming out of college with a better opportunity to be a really good quarterback. So that may play a role when the Raiders are deciding what they're going to do this offseason. Should they go into the draft, be aggressive, go find a guy that they're really a big fan of and say, that could be our quarterback of the future, even if he doesn't play this first year. Maybe he has a veteran in front of him, like a Brady or a Jimmy G or whoever the veteran is that you want to throw in there, whatever the name is. Maybe a young cat sits behind him. Who knows? But the point is, younger guys are having success a lot faster than they used to. And I think, personally, that's encouraging. Now, I'm not really into mock drafts right now because it's only January 18th. There's a lot of time between now and that April draft. Of course, we'll go hot and heavy in the draft at some point. Not now, but I have been looking around just to see what guys think as far as how many quarterbacks they believe is going to go in the first round and where they believe they're going to go. Of course, I have my mind on the top three, right? Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, and Will Levis. Those are the three guys that I'm really focused in on. But I checked out my man Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus. He's actually going to be on my radio show later on this week. So I wanted to check out what he was talking about. And he put out a mock draft, a round one mock draft. And he said he thought 5 QBs were going to go in round one. And again, it doesn't matter the position right now. It's only January 18th, but I still found it to be pretty interesting. So let me go over the 5 QBs that he has going in round one. Number 1 overall, he actually had a trade. He had the Colts trading up with the Bears and taking Bryce Young from Alabama. So that was the number 1 spot. Houston Texans, number 2. We know that they need a quarterback. He actually has them taking Will Levis from Kentucky. He says Levis isn't at all a bad consolation prior for the Texans. He's already shown he can operate an NFL offense with 2 different offensive coordinators who have done the same in the league. So it goes on to talk about Will Levis. But that was the explanation behind the Houston Texans taking him number 2. Then the third quarterback off the board, he actually has going number 7 to the Raiders, and that's quarterback C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State. I'm intrigued by C.J. Stroud. I know that, a lot of Raider Nation and even myself is a little concerned because of Ohio State. I know a lot of quarterbacks coming out of Ohio State don't have a lot of success. There's still questions on Justin Fields, if he's going to be the guy or not. We'll see. But I'm intrigued by C.J. Stroud, and what he said about C.J. Stroud was the Raiders are ready to hit the reset button at the quarterback position. Stroud is just a player to help them do so. With his quick trigger and pinpoint accuracy, Stroud looks like arguably the draft class best fit for Josh McDaniels' offense. He's coming off the best performance of his career from a draft perspective, earning a 92.2 overall grade against Georgia in the playoffs. And I know there's going to be a lot of different arguments. I know there's going to be a lot of different, talent evaluators that'll say different things, but I'm just pointing that out. So that's the third quarterback off the board, C.J. Stroud. He has going number 7 to the Raiders. At number 9, the Carolina Panthers taking quarterback Anthony Richardson from Florida, who I believe is the 4th best quarterback coming off the board this upcoming April. I think he's somewhat of a project. I think he's got probably the biggest upside of all the quarterbacks, but he also kind of feels like he has that highest boom bust type rate. He could be great. He might end up being fantastic, or he might end up being bad. So he has him going to the Carolina Panthers at number 9. And then the last quarterback he has taken off the board is actually a guy that a lot of folks suggested to me to take a look at and say, I think this could be the guy that the Raiders may be interested in. That's quarterback Tanner McKee from Stanford. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He said McKee is one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the draft class, but was put in a lot of unwinnable situations on tape at Stanford. So he had 5 guys going. Minnesota taking Tanner McKee at number 28. The Panthers taking Anthony Richardson at number 9. The Raiders taking C.J. Stroud at 7. The Texans taking Will Levis out of Kentucky at number 2. And then the Colts taking Bryce Young from Alabama at number 1. So it's just interesting, 5 names to pay attention to. Of course, the quarterbacks that I'm really intrigued by are Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I'm excited to see him at the East-West Shrine Bowl right here in Las Vegas, get to talk to him a little bit, so I'll bring that to the podcast. And Hendon Hooker. out of Tennessee. Of course, he's coming off the ACL. I think he'll be a later round draft pick that maybe the Raiders could grab, and they could stash him, send him behind one of those veterans if the Raiders are able to get that veteran. Matter of fact, we'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2. Before we get to any of that, though, I do want to tell you about the Ultimate GM, the Ultimate Football GM. And what is the Ultimate Football GM besides what we're doing right now? Talking about what the Raiders should do. Being the general manager of the team, we're actually putting our Dave Ziegler hat on. Well, it's actually a game that could be a lot of fun. And just like what we're doing here on the podcast, you do it, but it's in video game fashion. You hire the right coaches and coordinators, you trade players, you make draft picks, you navigate your team through free agency and the draft and all the ups and downs of a season. All this is a challenging and realistic game. It's completely free, and it's playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Raider podcast listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure you check it out today. It is in the game store. If you want to download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to kind of talk about a offseason plan of attack, especially if the Raiders don't go get Brady or another big-name veteran, whoever you want. I mean, there's a lot of names and speculation. Folks are talking about trading for Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that that's a realistic option. I might bring on Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers at one point to talk about it, to see what that would mean for the Packers side of things. I know it'd be tough for the Raiders to pull off, but I think it would be tough for the Packers to pull off. And so that's really what is slowing me down from thinking that that's even a possibility, but I get it. Tag team him back up with Devontae Adams and see if they can make the magic work. I get it. It makes sense. We all know about the Brady and the ties with Josh McDaniels, and, that could be a guy that they go get. I would think that that's probably a guy that's high on their radar list and a guy that they're thinking about, and they're contemplating back and forth and deciding what they want to do. I know Jimmy G, his name is out there. I think he's a good quarterback, but his availability is just not there, right? I mean, there's really no other way to put it. His availability is just not there consistently. At least whatever you had to say about DC, you knew he was always available, right? He just didn't miss time. I mean, when he broke his ankle, that's breaking his ankle, right? I mean, he really didn't miss any time in his career. So he was a guy that you could always count on. So, really, and it's funny, I talked about this on my radio show on Raider Nation Radio 920, Unnecessary Roughness, on Tuesday. And I was talking about, would you be okay if the Raiders were aggressive in the draft? If they saw a guy, maybe a CJ Stroud, maybe even a Bryce Young, said, that's the guy we want, we're going to go trade up and go get him. And because I wouldn't be. I'm not comfortable with that. Let's put it like that. And that's how we really get into the meats and potatoes of this segment. I wouldn't be comfortable with them trading up to go get a guy, and especially having to go up from like 7 to maybe 2 or 7 to 3, because that's a lot of draft capital. That is a ton of draft capital, and I don't think that the Raiders are built in a position where they can afford to just give up draft capital. I know a lot of folks are saying, well, whatever they get for Derek Carr, whatever trade, I don't think they're going to get any trade compensation for Derek Carr. I honestly believe in my heart that they're going to have to release him, and I think we're going to find that out sooner rather than later. I really do. I know the Super Bowl is on February 12th. I really have a feeling like around the 1st of February, around the 2nd of February, like very early around that time, in a couple weeks, we're going to learn the fate of Derek Carr, whether they're able to trade him or if they're going to have to flat out release him. And I just honestly believe that they're going to end up releasing him. I just don't think that teams are going to want to trade for him, even though the contract is in position. He might be best for him as far as contract goes. I just don't know if teams are going to want to do that. But I guess if they have enough teams that are going after him, maybe it could happen. Who knows? I mean, I just, again, going with my gut feeling. So I just think that with all the holes that the Raiders have on defense, and they still need to build up that offensive line, what they should do, instead of, if a quarterback drops to him, like ideally, like going back to, Mike Renner's mock draft that he had from Pro Football Focus, he had CJ Stroud dropping at number 7. If they're in love with CJ Stroud and think he could be the dude, and Raider Nation, they need a dude. They can't just go get a guy that's going to be okay, or even a guy, I hate to say it like this, but even be a guy like Jarrett Stidham. Like, I think Jarrett Stidham is a quality backup at best. We had Jason Horowitz, the voice of the Raiders, on my radio show on Tuesday, and he said that an ideal backup is a guy that can help you get to 500. Can if he's going to go in there and start, like say he has to go and start 6 games, he can go 500 in those 6 games. And I think that that's who Jarrett Stidham is. Now, I know it's a small sample size, what we saw, only 2 games, but I honestly believe that Jarrett Stidham could win you some games. I just don't think he's going to carry you through the course of a whole season. And I know a lot of people could point to Brock Purdy and say, yeah, but he was a 7th-round pick. Look what he's doing. But he's got a complete team built around him. And Brock Purdy's not bad. He was pretty stinking good at Iowa State. I was actually hoping that the Raiders were going to draft him later in the draft. But again, getting back to my plan or what I think that they should do in the offseason, I really think if they find a guy that they like that falls to them, like I said, any guy falls to them at number 7, they're like, okay, we'll take that dude. Even if he doesn't start this year, that'd be fine. As long as you don't go out of your way to go get him by having to give up draft capital, right? Build up that defense. There are so many holes on that defense. Go get a defensive tackle. Go get a couple corners. Go get a linebacker. Go get another safety, right? I mean, right now they have about 11 draft picks. So, if you're doing your job right, if your scouting is right, you should be able to get some quality players. You really should. And then, of course, in free agency, you can still address some holes in free agency as well, including that offensive line. Right? You can go and get a big-time tackle, or even if you see like a big-time tackle fall at number 7, instead of forcing yourself to go get a QB because, oh, my God, we need a quarterback, go get that offensive tackle. Shore up the team. Worst-case scenario, and this is just worst-case scenario, and I know there's going to be pressure because not the draft, but the Super Bowl is going to be in Vegas in 2024, so everyone's going to want to throw that narrative out there. Well, the Raiders need to host the Super Bowl. Wouldn't that be great if the Raiders hosted the Super Bowl? They're all in on hosting the Super Bowl in 2024. Like, we're going to hear that, and we're going to talk about it on the podcast, please believe. But we're going to hear so much of that. They can't fall for that pressure, right? We had a texter text in on Tuesday and was like, don't fall for the pressure of the Super Bowl. If the Raiders and Dave Ziegler and Champ Kelly and Josh McDaniels, if they build this team right, they can win the Super Bowl anywhere. It don't matter if it's in Vegas. It doesn't matter if it's in New Orleans. It doesn't matter if it's in Dallas. It doesn't matter where it's at, right? They should be able to be a good enough team and build the team up. So, and again, we're talking about being a successful team for years to come, not just one year and then 5 years off, and then 1 year and then 5 years off. 1 year you visit the playoffs and you're off for another 3-4 years. You don't want that. You want that sustainability. So if they build this thing right, I mean, hell, they could win a Super Bowl anywhere. Yeah, it would be nice to win it in your own home in Las Vegas. It's a great storyline, but I just want to see the team built correctly. So don't force it. Don't force the issue because you feel like you have to go get a guy, right? I mean, like when John Gruden had his first draft in 2017 when he took over again, you knew that they were going to go get a tackle because they had to get a tackle. So at first they wanted McGlinchey. They didn't get him because San Francisco got him. So they went and got Colton Miller, which ended up being a really good pick. But it was almost like you felt like they were going to force their hand to, okay, we have to go get this tackle. And, and it even felt like when they went and got Alex Leatherwood, it was like, oh, got to have a tackle. Let's go get Alex Leatherwood. And they didn't even get the right one. But it was like, have to go get that. And we talk about it all the time. Best player available or best player available in position of need. And I feel like a lot of time with Gruden, he went with best player available in position of need in their opinion, which happened to be wrong as well. Like Damon Arnett, when they drafted Damon Arnett, number 19 overall, I thought they were going to get a cornerback. I just didn't think they were going to get that cornerback. He wasn't on my radar. Now, that doesn't mean that he wasn't a good one, and he ended up not being a good one, but he just wasn't on my radar, so it just kind of blew my mind when they said Damon Arnett. I thought they were going to go A.J. Terrell, but the Falcons had already drafted him, a couple picks ahead of time. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to kind of unpack here, but I just don't want to see the Raiders force feed and say, oh, my God, we don't have a quarterback. We got to get a quarterback in the future. Go get that guy. Don't feel the pressure of having to get the guy. If you have to get a veteran, if you have to bring in Brady, fine, bring him in. If you have to bring in Jimmy G, fine, bring him in. You already know that none of those guys are long-term solutions. They're going to be short-time guys. So if you get your long-term solution, what you think, even if you go and get a Hendon Hooker, maybe in round 3 or round 4, because he's still there because of the torn ACL, maybe that is actually a better not option, but a better choice at that time because, well, you have an opportunity to let him heal. You have an opportunity to see what he is. And if he doesn't work out, at least you only wasted a 3rd or 4th round pick on him instead of trading up in the 1st round to go get a guy that doesn't work out, right, and setting your team back. So I'd rather them get a quarterback in a later round that happens to not be the guy, but not whiff on multiple picks. I mean, basically, you trade up, you're giving up multiple picks to go get a guy. You better get it right. So at some point, they got to find their dude, right? Again, you got to lean on your scouts. You got to lean on what you're looking for in your system. Whatever fits your system best is the guy that you need, right, to be your dude because you're competing with Mahomes. You're competing with Herbert. Hopefully, you get out of the AFC West, you're competing with Allen. You're competing with Burrow. You're competing with Jackson. You're hoping to have those guys. And again, going back to my nugget that I had in segment number 1, these guys are having success early, right? And they're on rookie deals at that time too, so you can continue to build your team around them. That's the beautiful thing, and that's the beautiful thing about getting a guy in the first round, because you get that fifth-year option if you get the right guy. But it's a lot of ifs, it's a lot of buts, but I think that that's the way that the Raiders should attack. I don't think that they should force-feed the issue just because they need that franchise quarterback. Let him fall to you. If he's your guy, great, get him. If not, get the best player available. Defense, offensive line, whatever it is, go get that guy. The Raiders don't have enough all-around talent and not enough deep talent. They could turn this thing around with all the cap space that they're going to have, especially after the whole Derek Carr situation is resolved, and at least 11 draft picks. I'm not saying that they're going to turn themselves into a Super Bowl team contender overnight, but they could do some damage. They really could. That's what I got for you. Segment number 3 is coming up with your calls and texts, 707-654-4693. Before I get into that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of today's show, BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends from every pro and amateur league out there. Pro football, of course, college basketball has been fantastic. The NBA is good, but college basketball has been great. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, clearly you do, you can find those as well at BetOnline.net. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information on. All you got to do is head to the website today on your laptop or mobile device to learn about more. BetOnline.net. That is where the game starts. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and text straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with Nathan Glass. He's calling to talk about the quarterback positions for the Raiders as a Steeler fan, who was actually turned on to the show by Chris Carter, host of Locked On Steelers. Here he is, Nathan Glass.
How you doing, Q? Nathan Glass again, Steeler fan from California. I just wanted to chime in on that quarterback situation you guys having over there. What do you think about this scenario? Of course, I mean, you guys can build through the draft. Of course, that's always an option. Always, to me, that's a good option. But what if with the weapons you guys have, what if you guys wanted to bring in a veteran, somebody you can bring in maybe for about 4 or 5 seasons? And I was thinking, I will be keeping a close eye on San Francisco this season. The reason why I'm saying that is because if Brock Purdy takes the Niners to the Super Bowl, and I would say win or lose, if he takes the Niners to the Super Bowl, I don't think you take him out. I think he's shown that I'm the guy. And that's a scenario where I think you guys can go get Jimmy G. I think Jimmy G could come in and be a great option for you guys for about 4 or 5 seasons. I mean, he's not old. He's he's still got something in the tank. I know he has a little bit of injury problems, but you reunite him with Josh McDaniels, and I mean, I think with the weapons the Raiders have, I think that would be a nice fit for you guys. So my question for you is, do you think Jimmy G will be the Raiders quarterback next season? Thanks for taking my call. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. Shout out to my guy, Chris Carter, for turning you on to the show. And look, I think Jimmy G is an option, and I think that is regardless of what Purdy does, right? Jimmy G is not going to be in San Francisco next year. They're going to have a competition between Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. And if Brock Purdy takes him to the promised land, he'll probably end up being the guy with Trey Lance as the backup for now. But Jimmy G, he's going to be on the open market. My thing with him, as I mentioned earlier in the show, he's injury prone, so I'm really not a fan of Jimmy G, and I also believe that he's going to end up with the Jets. When it's all said and done, my gut feeling tells me he'll be in New York with the Jets. He's got so many connections with the San Francisco, ties there between Robert Saleh, offensive coordinators that are there. I mean, just all kind of different people that are in the building. I think that they are a bigger believer in Jimmy G there in New York with the Jets. They obviously got to find a solution for Zach Wilson. So I think he'll end up with the Jets, but he's definitely a guy that, the Raiders are considering and thinking about with those Josh McDaniels ties. But, Nate, thanks so much for the call, my man. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a text from North Texas Raider. He said, what's up, Q? It's North Texas Raider. This upcoming offseason is one of the most important we've had in a very long time, maybe ever. And the reason is simple, quarterback. We have an offense that is playoff caliber right now. I think we'd be doing a disservice to the entire fan base if we didn't roll into next season with a high caliber quarterback in place. Anything else would just be a waste of time to the fans and, more importantly, to the other players on the team. In my opinion, we absolutely have to pick which quarterback in the draft is the best and do what we need to go get him. It'd be very nice to go get someone like Brady to come in while that quarterback is transitioning. But get that quarterback in the draft is most important. I've been a fan since 91, so I know what it's like to try to use retread after retread after retread. I honestly would much rather keep throwing draft picks at that position until we finally get it right. Anyway, love what you do, Q, for the nation. North Texas Raider out. Thank you so much for that text. And see, I'm the exact opposite. I do think that they need to get their guy. They need to find a franchise quarterback. They need to have a high-quality player. Absolutely. I just don't think they need to do whatever it takes to go get that guy because they still need to build that team around. The defense is piss poor, right? I mean, let's just be blunt about it. They have Max Crosby, maybe Nate Hobbs, maybe Trayvon Merrick, and an older Chandler Jones. And really, I mean, that is it. Nate Hobbs has a lot to prove after having a rough season, his second year in the league, and Trayvon Merrick took a step back as well. He's got a lot to prove as well. So they've got to have a complete overhaul on defense. They need to really build that team up. If they want that team to be a contender, if you want that team to be a contender not only for 1 year, but multiple years, you've got to have a solid defense. You've got to build that offensive line. They got a lot more holes than just one trigger man. Like, for example, when Kansas City traded up to go get Patrick Mahomes and they had Alex Smith, they already had a good team. They were already winning the AFC West. They just weren't, a dominant team where they were so dynamic offensively. And that's when Andy Reid and them noticed Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech and said, you know what? With that guy's arm talent and his ability, we can win a lot of games given the team that we already have. So that's how I'm looking at it. Like, build the team up. Don't force the issue because even if you have a really good trigger man, if you don't have a good team, it's going to be a disappointing season. You might win some games. You might, he might will you to a couple victories here and there. You might sneak into the playoffs, but are you going to be a contender? Build that team. That's where I think. But I know where you're coming from. You want that trigger man so bad because it's been so long since the Raiders have had that just dominant dude. And, even I thought for a minute that Carr was definitely going to be that guy. But, there was only a couple visits to the playoffs, and I'm not putting all that on him. I know that's not all his fault. A lot of that was the organization's failure to put a defense around him. Put a solid offensive line around him all the time. He had a little stretch where he had a really good – remember he had the car insurance? That was great. It didn't last that long. And the weapons definitely weren't there very long. So, some of it was on Carr. Some of it was on the organization. But they got to get it right. And hopefully this new staff, Dave Ziegler and company, understand that. And that's what they're trying to build. I believe it's what they're trying to build, but we've got to see it before we really absolutely know it. Last year, they didn't have a first or second round pick because of Devontae Adams. This year, they do. So I don't want to just see them throw picks at another team just to go trade up and get a guy that might not necessarily actually end up being the guy, if you know what I mean. Thank you for that text, though, my man. I do appreciate that. Up next, got a call from Barry from Baltimore. He's calling to talk about the quarterback position and what he hopes happens and what he hopes doesn't happen and his reason why. Barry from Baltimore.
What up, Q? This is Barry from Baltimore. Just wanted to call in. As always, appreciate what you do. Always bringing the content every day. Of course, my first listen. But I wanted to call in about the subject in regards to the quarterback and, the future of the quarterback and what they need. And I totally agree with you. And I understood what you were saying about getting that dog mentality player as a quarterback. I'm not saying Carr was. I'm not saying he is. Whatever. I don't get in the Carr business like you mentioned. I do believe that it was time to move on. If it's for the better or worse, whatever, it's just something needed to change. And I think that was it. I am nervous, though, of what is to come. Like, are we going to be stuck in this quarterback, thing where we just can't get one and every year we're signing a veteran or, we're not picking high enough to get a stud? It's just, I hope not. Hope they can find a quarterback for the future. After what I saw last night, I'm not too sold on the Brady thing. My fear is if they do bring Brady in, say, a year or two, they're going to neglect drafting a quarterback high. I think to get the talent, you've got to pick high, or get one at high in the draft. I could be wrong, but, most second round, third rounds, really don't, work out. There's some, a handful. Maybe Carr is one, Wilson, Dak to an extent, whatever, but there's not many. Most of them are first-round talent. And you can see all these young quarterbacks in the league in the playoffs and evolving. That's what I want the Raiders to have. So I'm afraid if they go with Brady, they might not go that route because Brady's going to want O-line, which we need, defense, where, be honest with you, I'd rather get that young quarterback, man. I mean, I know, there's a possibility maybe Adams might not be happy about that. I don't know. We'll see. I do like having Devontae, but man, I want that young quarterback. I hope they go that route. But I guess we'll see here in time. I don't want Jimmy G, man. I just think Jimmy G's always hurt. I think he's pretty much on the same level as Carr, so it's a lateral move. I mean, I guess maybe you could pay him cheaper, but I don't know. I mean, what's use having Jimmy G if he's going to get hurt? I'd rather stick with Stidham, draft a young quarterback, let them battle it out. I don't know. That's what I'm hoping happens, man. But I'm with you, though. I want that. I understood what you were talking about. It's a shame you got to explain yourself, but it is what it is. I mean, especially nowadays. But, yeah, man, I just want that. I just hope we do that. I hope we go that route. I hope we improve the team. But, yeah, it's just my 2 thoughts on everything that was talked about today. So, anyways, man, appreciate it, man. Love what you do. Go Raiders. I'm out.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And the main thing is you cannot have another quarterback carousel situation like the Raiders had between Gannon and Carr, right? Again, like I've been saying, I really hope they find their guy. I just hope that they don't try to force it. Like, okay, we need a guy. We can't have a quarterback carousel, so let's go get a guy. And then it ends up being the wrong guy because you know what that starts? That starts the quarterback carousel. These veterans, Brady, anyone else, it's a short-term solution. I'm talking about a long-term dude, right? I mean, again, going back to segment number 1, all these guys playing this weekend are under the age of 30. Dak Prescott's the oldest cat playing this weekend. He's only 29. Think about that. You got to have someone at some point that can compete with Mahomes twice, Herbert twice, Wilson twice, Allen hopefully, Burrow hopefully, Jackson hopefully. You've got to have someone that can compete with us. The AFC, they got some arms. They got some arm talent as far as the quarterbacks go. The Raiders got to find their version. They got to find a guy that can compete with those dudes. Just don't force it. That's all I say. Don't force it. Let it come to you naturally. It's like organically having a conversation. Like, don't try to force a zinger into a conversation because you want to be the funny dude in the room. You just got to happen organically. It's just how it is. So thank you so much for that call, Barry. I do appreciate you. We'll close out with this text from Big Ben, the Raiders version. He says, hey, Q, a little info I picked up looking at the numbers after Brady's ridiculous 66 pass attempts, which is obviously way too much. Tom Brady's pass attempts in his career per season, anywhere from the high 400s to low 600s per season. Tom Brady with Leftwich at offensive coordinator, well over 700 attempts both season. Let's put that into context. Only 4 quarterbacks threw the ball in the 600 range this season. Everyone else is in the 500s and high 400s. Brady, 733. Only one quarterback in history had over 700 attempts. That was Matt Stafford in 2012. The Lions only won 4 games. Last 2 years under Leftwich, both over 700, including the NFL record 733 this season. What in the world was Leftwich doing? His offensive play calling was awful. Well, just like that, he was fired as the OC. Brady might not be prime Brady, but he's not as bad as Leftwich made him out to be. A mid-40s quarterback should not be breaking NFL records for pass attempts. Like it or not, Raider Nation, Brady and Gronk are most likely coming to Vegas, and it's not as bad as you think. That's some deep diving right there, some deep research from Big Ben, the Raiders version. And, yeah, Byron Leftwich on his way out of Tampa Bay. A lot of things fell off after Bruce Arians took a step away from the sidelines and went upstairs. Things just weren't the same. I think Todd Bowles, I don't think he's very good of a head coach. And Byron Leftwich, I mean, he went from a guy that looked like he was going to be the head coach at Jacksonville to a guy who's out of there in Tampa Bay. But you're absolutely right. Those 700 attempts, 733 attempts to be exact this season, way too much. I don't think Josh McDaniels would have him throwing the ball that much, especially when you have a run game like Josh Jacobs, especially when you have, other weapons on the team. They have other running backs as well. It's not just Josh Jacobs, but they could run the ball. I mean, that lack of running that they did on Monday night against the Cowboys was embarrassing. It was just absolutely embarrassing, man. You cannot leave your guy out to dry like that. 66 ridiculous pass attempts, like you mentioned. The only thing that concerns me about what I saw from Brady, and again, I don't want to overreact to one game. I mentioned that on the show. Some of those passes look great. Some of those passes, I was like, wow, Brady looks fantastic. Then some of those passes made me scratch my head like, what the hell was that? Right? I mean, simple out routes behind the guy. Bouncing a few balls. Looked like he did not want to get touched. That's the other thing. Looked like he wanted nothing to do with getting touched by the Dallas Cowboy defenders. That also concerns me. I don't need to see a 46-year-old skittish guy in the pocket. That's not going to work for anyone, especially when you're playing in the AFC West against the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Chargers. All have edge rushers. They can get to the quarterback. No need for someone that can be skittish. Got to have a guy that's going to hang in there. We know he's not going to run. So if he's going to be the Raiders quarterback, he's got to be able to hang in the pocket and trust his offensive line. Can he still do that? What I saw on Monday night didn't look like that. But again, he could, go relax and take the offseason to kind of rejuvenate himself, just kind of decompress a little bit and then get ready to get back into the mix. And maybe everything would be all good. I mean, I know he's had a hell of an a hell of a season with a lot of stuff in his personal life, and I don't want to bring that up. That's not my business to talk about, but that could take a lot out of somebody. So maybe this was just a bad year for Brady to have a bad year. And really, it wasn't even a bad year. Just that was a bad playoff game on Monday night against the Cowboys. So that's all I got for you on today's show. Thank you so much for all the feedback. Plenty of great feedback. Chef Nick in Colorado will start things off with you tomorrow. Plus, we got plenty of more calls and texts on the way. We got more news and notes of the day, and we'll have plenty of conversation here as we do each and every day on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Again, thanks so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Thanks to my man Ari at Ari Produces on Twitter. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.